Hi, I'm Johnny. This is Johnny Likes, the show where I talk about movies that I like. Today, I'm going to talk about an elegant vampire movie from the early 1980s. Today, Johnny likes The Hunger.
You tell him, Johnny. You tell the world.
Mild spoilers contained in this review. The Hunger stars Susan Sarandon, Catherine Deneuve, and David Bowie. It was written by James Costigan and Michael Thomas, based on Whitley Strieber's book. And it was directed by Tony Scott. Deneuve and Bowie play vampires, Miriam and John Blaylock. They're married and they have been for some time. When all of a sudden, John starts aging at a crazy fast rate. John seeks out Dr. Sarah Roberts, played by Susan Sarandon. Roberts is a doctor working on a cure for progeria, the disease where people age super fast, resulting in incredibly short lifespans. Can Roberts help John? Is Miriam eyeing Roberts as something a little bit more possibly permanent than just a doctor? So I have a soft spot for this era of filmmaking. I really like the 80s new wave music, and I think that the sounds of the time helped to define the visuals of the time. For me, any movie from about 1978 to about 1983 represents a very specific era in movies. It's its own time. It has a very specific look and feel to it. It's still got the 1970s dirty streets kind of look, but it's a little bit past that. It's into the 80s now, but it hasn't quite gotten to that full neon gloss that the later 80s had. It's an interesting transition period, and nothing else quite looks like it. I love the look and aesthetic of this film. It's like the filmmakers got together, had a meeting, and they decided to just do everything as over-the-top cinematic and stylish as they could. At every opportunity, someone will be smoking with a semi-transparent curtain blowing in the wind in the background, while someone else is preferably wearing sunglasses indoors at night. That's the kind of style and aesthetic of the film. They also have lots of close-ups of skin touching skin, often with blood involved, and they do use a fair amount of slow motion. Although they're not Zack Snyder levels, but they use their fair share. Much of the film also features a midnight blue tint that reminds me of sex scenes from the 80s, which is probably mostly due to the work of Tony Scott, especially later stuff like Top Gun. Very, very much the same kind of tint there. The Blaylocks are also dressed in very expensive, fashionable clothes of the time. I quite like the first hour of this movie, mostly when David Bowie was kind of the main lead. It features an excellent opening scene where Deneuve and Bowie play the older, swinging, hot couple at the club trying to pick up some young folks for dinner. All this happens while basically a music video for Bela Lugosi's Dead is going on, with Bauhaus rocking it. It sets the style and tone for the rest of the film, and it's an immediate attention grabber. Once Sarandon's Dr. Roberts takes over as the focus, the film changes tone a little bit. It goes from a movie about impending doom and kind of panic and sudden loss to a full-on erotic thriller with heavy drug addiction motifs. Miriam is the pusher, and Roberts is the victim who is addicted from her very first hit. I'm not sure if I missed this, but I'm pretty sure I didn't. We don't really know why Roberts is working on a cure for progeria. She doesn't seem especially passionate about anti-aging or eternal life or eternal youth or any of those sort of things. So when she does get presented with the option later on by Miriam, It would have been more dramatic and effective if we had seen Roberts actually yearning for what Miriam offers. Sometimes style over substance is a choice that pays off, and I think that it ultimately does here. As without the style, this movie wouldn't be all that much, as there's not too much going on story-wise. The characters are okay, but I would have liked a little bit more development. We don't really get to spend too much time with this couple, so when John starts deteriorating, we aren't all that attached to him or to Miriam. His decline doesn't hit as hard as it should have dramatically, and it's more of an exercise in makeup than anything else. We know next to nothing about Miriam as well. We get little glimpses of her past through little flashes of memory, and I like that approach. I just could have used a bunch more of it. Also could have used a bit more story-wise, like maybe they could have involved the police more, bumped up that aspect a bit. I just felt the story was a little bit lackluster. Miriam is the weakest character in the film. I found it hard to believe that after spending centuries with John, who is essentially her soulmate, that she would not have an intense and prolonged period of mourning. Instead, she spends like an afternoon and then is immediately on the prowl for someone to fill his shoes. And then she chooses like the first person that comes along. Like she spends an afternoon with Roberts, then decides to most likely spend the next couple of centuries with her. I found that pretty hard to believe. Like, okay, Roberts looks kind of like John, and I get it, you have a type, but come on, that was not all that believable. The opening scene with the Bauhaus feature, that can be risky, although I think it did work excellent here. As Peter Murphy looks pretty vampiric as it is. Bela Lugosi's Dead has some pretty dark lyrics. I guess you'd say it's on brand. And Bauhaus overall just have a gothic tone to them. So that works. But I also gotta point out a couple more musical connections here. So Bauhaus actually covers Ziggy Stardust by David Bowie, and they do a great job. And in the scene where Bowie attacks the rollerblader underneath the overpass or the bridge, whatever that little structure is, there's a song playing on the boombox, and that song is China Girl by Iggy Pop off of The Idiot, which David Bowie happened to produce that album, and he also co-wrote the song China Girl, and he actually went on to re-record it himself for Let's Dance. Another weird little thing was that this is the second movie to happen to feature Bauhaus prominently that I've reviewed in the last 2 months. For more on that, you can check out my Night of the Demons review. So I thought that Bowie, Deneuve, and Sarandon were all well cast. They played their characters well. I never believed that Deneuve and Bowie were ancient, although they did play their characters with an aristocratic elegance that really helped me to focus on the narrative. This particular brand of vampires is much closer to Anne Rice's than, say, like Bram Stoker's. These are not ghoulish monsters. They're just rich people who drink blood, basically. Yeah, they don't seem to be affected by the sunlight or crosses or any of that stuff. It's just drink blood, live forever. It's pretty sweet as far as vampire rules go. This vampire movie is by no means one made for teens at a drive-in. It is made for adults, and it's very adult in its presentation. I would also say that of David Bowie's film roles that I've seen, this is probably my favorite. There was a problem with casting Bowie in this role, though, and that is he is quite skinny. And once they start applying age-defying makeup, that adds some thickness that this shouldn't be there and becomes noticeable. It's kind of spoiled hit the first or second stage of his aging process for me. He was so noticeably more thick. And I don't mean 2 C's thick. I think the filmmakers realized just how good of a job the makeup was. And for the most part, they do kind of keep him in the shadows. Whereas I think if they had showed him in full sunlight, the gag would have just fell right through and it just would not have worked. Watching makeup artists age somebody up is always fascinating, especially when you've got hindsight to see what the actor actually looks like 30 or 40 years later. Like, we know Bowie doesn't quite look like how they aged him up to be, but they did. They gave it a good shot, and it's interesting to see just what they do there. Another really interesting one to check out would be look at Ian McKellen in The Keep. Now, that one, he would have been around 40 years old. It's from around the same time, early 80s. And I thought they did a really good job because you could see what McKellen looks like now that he's, I don't know, in his 80s. I don't know exactly how old he is. But in that film, it kind of screwed with me. It's like, what is going on? How is he still an old man and this is 40 years ago? And then they de-aged him. And then they took off the makeup. I was like, oh, okay, he is mortal. Good to know, good to know. But I digress. So like I said, I really enjoyed the first hour or so of this movie, or the first half of the movie. And I liked the second half as well. I just didn't find myself as engaged as the first half. I found the climax of the film to be just a little bit too messy for my liking. Once all Miriam's old lovers started to come out, it just kind of raised more questions. Like, were they just in some sort of slumber? Are they in like a waking hell? If they got a whole bunch of blood, would that replenish them? If you were to chop off their heads or light them on fire and turn them to ash, would that have actually truly killed them? A little bit more clarity in the rules of the vampires would have, I think, gone a long way for me here. You don't have to do much, but just a little bit more. It felt like they were building towards something, and it just never quite came together satisfactorily. For a 40-something-year-old film, I still think this one merits a watch. It's very easy on the eyes. The story isn't super deep, but it's still enjoyable and gets the job done. The acting was well done, even if the characters were a little bit underwritten. And it's got vampires. Like, that's the selling point for me. It's got vampires. I'm there. I think I'm gonna rate this a 3.5 out of 5. It had a wonderful tone and some memorable scenes. Notably, the opening, the scene where John kills the neighbor, and of course, Deneuve and Sarandon. But overall, it just wasn't especially memorable or all that satisfying to me. So if you like this one, I would check out Only Lovers Left Alive. It's a fairly recent vampire film starring Tom Hiddleston and Tilda Swinton. Check out Let the Right One In, the Swedish, I'm going to say Swedish, it's probably not Swedish, the not English European vampire movie from the 2000s with the young girl vampire and the little boy. It's a good one. Also check out Near Dark, which, much like this film, had some excellent scenes and tone, but overall just didn't quite click like it could have. What do we got for questions? Questions for the audience. Today, what do we want to know? What's David Bowie's best film role? What's the best style over substance movie? And what is the best 1980s vampire film? If you could do me a favor and like and subscribe, that would be super duper. It's quick, free, and relatively painless. Plus, it really helps me out. Thanks for watching me talk about movies for a little bit, and you can tune in next time and see what else Johnny likes.
Gotcha. You look awful. What have you been doing?
None of your business.